We're looking at question 54 in the AP Statistics Midterm Review packet, and we are told that we want to take a simple random sample, SRS, of 50 students from a population of 816 students on a dormitory on campus. So I have a sample size of 50, I got lowercase n, I have a capital N, a population of 816. So what do? We label the students 001 to 816 in alphabetical order. So this actually sounds like a good way to know how to write a sampling process from a table of random digits. So there's some good notes you can be taking here. So we have a line for the table of random digits, and we're told, hey, what are the first three students? Who are the first three students going to be that we sample? So I guess that means I'm actually going to perform this. So let's look at some what's going on. And what's going on is I'm going to label, it says 001 to 816, but because of that, I have to focus on what am I going to ignore. I'm going to ignore numbers outside that range, which means 000 and 817 and 999. Those numbers I have to ignore. I'm also going to ignore repeats. Now the reason why I'm ignoring repeats is because if I select one student to be a part of the sample and their number pops up again, I can't select that same student to be a part of the sample. I have to ignore it and go to the next number in the table of random digits. So I have to ignore repeats and ignore numbers outside the range. So let's go ahead and look at the first few parts of that table line from the table of random digits. And I have the first thing, if I break down, I'm looking at 3 digits at a time. So that's another thing I have to include if I'm analyzing how to sample from a table of random digits, is how many numbers am I selecting at a time. 3 digits at a time. So 955. So I look at my choices. Choice A starts out with 955, which means my answer is not A. Now why am I saying that? It's the first number that pops up. It's because we said we are going to ignore numbers outside our range. And our range is going to stop at 816. I'm going to ignore numbers outside the interval from 001 to 816. And 955 is outside, so I'm going to ignore it. So let's go. Next number, 929. Okay, so if I look at that, that looks like choice D. So I'm going to go ahead and say that D is not my answer. Why? For the same reason A is not my answer. We are told to ignore numbers outside that interval from 001 to 816. 929, outside that interval. So what's the first number I get? 400. So if I ignored that and I ignored this, the first number I'm going to get is 400, and that one is allowed. That's good news, because that tells me that my answer is not C. So now I know my answer is either B or E. So let me kind of go through this. All right, so what's next? The next number is 769. That's in the interval, so I know that's it. So boom, I'll use green instead. So I know 769. That doesn't help. Both B and E have 769. All right, so let's look at the next table of just entry that we have. All right, so 769. So that means my answer is, looks like B has 400, 769, 769. So that means B is not my answer. Now why? 769 came up. So why is B not my answer? It's because look at your second entry. The second student you'd be sampling. It's the 769th person in alphabetical order. So who's the third student you're sampling? The 769th student in alphabetical order. That's the same student. We are told to ignore repeats. Wrong one. We are told to ignore repeats, so I have to ignore this one, which means the next student I ask is the 335. So my answer in this case is E. Now this is a really good one to do. Maybe you're not expected to know how to write it based off of the sample process with table of random digits, but maybe you are expected to know how to use it. And what's nice about this one is there are 2 tricks here. The first one is numbers outside the interval. Choice A and choice D were numbers outside the interval. The second trick to do is to not ignore repeats. And that's what choice B does. It's choice B says, hey, I have 769, then I have 769 again. Now, it's not bad in this case because those two are right next to each other. But if you're actually doing this, it might happen 4 or 5 observations in the future from where you saw it. So it's always important to make a list as you're going of what they are. So that is question 54.